My name is Carol Parkinson. I'm the Director of Harvestworks. And I'll tell you a little bit about the project. It's called Common Ground, Art, Data, and Ecology. And it's an inquiry into how the fields of art and science can collaborate, especially using environmental data and engaging in transdisciplinary research. Harvestworks and the New York City Urban Field Station will release a report early next year on the potential for such collaborations in New York State. Tonight, consultant Kevin Duggan will brief us on what we've learned and will introduce the Urban Field Stations team. A panel discussion will follow, and we'll follow the introduction, and will feature 4 artists, Neill Mimi Goese, Kristin, Take-Home Park, who are collaborating with scientific researchers and using data drawn from the natural world as their creative process. And we have some questions we're going to explore. Thank you. And I'd like to introduce Kevin. Kevin will tell us about the report and more about the project.
Right. Thank you so much, Carol. Thanks everyone for being here. So as Carol said, we've been working on this project for about a year now. And actually, we're still in the process. We're still sort of synthesizing a little bit what we're learning. As Carol mentioned, we're going to produce a report that should be available, I would say, early next year, mid-January or so. So actually, I'm going to talk a little bit more, I think, about the background of the project, a little bit less about what we'll be reporting out. I'll quickly add also that this event, in a way, is kind of like the last piece, or one of the last pieces of sort of the information gathering that we're doing as part of this project. So we're recording it tonight, and so this will help inform the project. So I'm a lifelong arts administrator. I've worked with lots of different organizations. A lot of work I've done has been sort of at the intersection of art and technology. I was at the New York Foundation for the Arts in the 90s, sort of really heady days early days of the internet and art used in digital tools. And a lot of that work involved interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary projects. And I also did a lot of work with organizations like Harvestworks, which were artist-centered, really devoted to really enabling innovative projects by artists, especially using technology. But I'm also an artist. My own work is really rooted in natural science. It's not technology-based at all. But I've often done residencies at programs in natural areas. A couple of years ago, I did a residency at the Hike Preserve, which is a nature preserve in upstate New York. It's in Rensselaerville. It's a little hamlet sort of southwest of Albany. I encourage you to visit there. It's great. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful organization. And so I did a residency there. And while I was there, I encountered several scientists who were also doing their work there. There was one woman who was studying cricket song, which was really fascinating. And there was another woman who was studying these ant colonies that are prevalent at the Hike Preserve. And so one day I went out into the field with her, and I was just sort of amazed with just the way first of all, her specific knowledge of her field and this species, and just the way that she observed the world was kind of extraordinary, and really kind of revealed things that I wouldn't ordinarily see myself. Even though I sort of pride myself as an artist who is steeped in the work of observation. And so I thought, well, this is just sort of serendipitous encounters with these other modes of understanding the natural world that was so sort of inspiring. And I thought, well, this is great. If you could make this a more formal or more in-depth sort of encounter or potential for collaboration, what would arise from that. And it wasn't just the hike preserve, it was the hike preserve and biological field station. And I wonder, what is this thing, a biological field station? It suddenly occurred to me I didn't really understand what that was and what made this place more than just a nature preserve. And I realized that biological field stations are places where scientists can conduct really place-based research related to their fields of study. In a lot of ways, it's sort of analogous to artist residencies. And I thought that was really quite fascinating. I thought, well, okay, I want to explore this further. What are these places and what's the potential? And this really led to this project. So then Carol and I had a conversation, and it became clear that there's another facet to the field stations that is really pertinent to the work that artists are doing, and that's the idea of data, the use of data as both content and also almost as a kind of medium for artists, which is something that a number of artists in the Harvestworks community are exploring. And field stations are, again, as places where scientists are going to do fundamental research. They also become places that have accumulated information and environmental data over many decades in some cases. Within the field station community, there's a subset of long-term ecological research network, which is a select group that many of whom have, again, decades of environmental information that's been collected. So it seemed like this was fertile ground, no pun intended, for really exploring transdisciplinary collaboration between the arts and sciences around environmental issues and land use. So we applied successfully for a grant from the state, the Regional Economic Development Council grant, which was awarded through the New York State Council on the Arts, basically to assess what the potential is in New York State for this kind of collaborative work between the field station community and the arts. So that's really the work that we've been doing over the past year. And so we approached this by, we basically sort of try to understand what the broader national context is for what's going on in field stations. We looked more closely at what was going on in New York State. There's about 23 field stations here. We conducted interviews, we did some surveys, and we also held a half-day meeting where we brought together artists, scientists, curators, folks from city government, funders, to really have a more in-depth conversation, really around two specific areas. How can we make, how is collaboration being conducted successfully? I'm also trying to understand community engagement. What are the benefits that can arise from the presence of artists within at field stations and within communities that they field stations. So, as I say, we're still really in the process of sort of synthesizing everything that we've learned over the past year. I'll make a couple sort of general observations. First of all, as I sort of noted, I feel that there's almost a sort of a kinship between the field stations and arts organizations. They share a lot of the attributes that we know in the not-for-profit arts world. Field stations are run by people who are really passionate and concerned about the work that they're doing. They're often working in under-resourced circumstances, which we certainly understand. Their field stations, like artists and arts organizations, are challenged to connect with the public and to make their work visible and to make the case for the relevancy of the work that they're doing. And really, this is sort of that. It's sort of one of the places where bringing together the arts and field stations really makes sense. That the combine the resources of these two different communities and the different kinds of knowledge and experience that they have can yield a third thing, which would, in turn, I think, connect with the public in a way that neither field independently does. I think the other thing is that the idea of artists working in field stations really connects with a number of trends that are taking place within the arts. One thing is this idea of creative placemaking. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this expression. It's the idea that arts and culture and sort of creativity that they embody can enrich specific communities and a sense of place and really bring benefits to communities and become really integral to the health and well-being of communities. So this has been a really important trend, I think, in the arts over the last few years. I think it really also intersects with this idea of place-based work related to the environment. I think we touched on data as also a trend in the arts that really relates to this. And also social practice work that artists who really see their work as being really taking place within communities and being a form of sort of intervention or really in relationship to a community, not just an object or outcome, but actually integral to their presence within the community. So I think those are all really related to this. The last thing I'll say is just that I think we here in New York State are fortunate in that we have both a number of the field stations, as I said earlier, there's more than 20 of them, and many of them are affiliated with universities, so there's a sort of robust community there. And we have obviously have the arts infrastructure and really cultural resources, and that I think one of the things that this report will help you, I think, is to sort of forge a bridge between these two different communities and see what comes out of that. Does anybody have any questions about the work that we're doing? Or?
I think we should leave questions.
Okay. So I'm going to now hand it over to Bram Gunther and Lindsay Campbell from the New York City Urban Field Station. So they've been our partner on this project, and it's really been a great partnership. And in a lot of ways, I feel like the process is sort of modeled what we're talking about, this idea of transdisciplinary collaboration. And as they'll tell you, they've, in the last few years, initiated a really interesting artist residency program that I think also is really leading the way in terms of what's possible here.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Put that up there. Can you do it? You need to make it fast.
I can press them.
Oh,
okay.
okay.
I can just do the slide. Yep, that's all right.
At the end of this
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for coming on a Friday night, to Carol and Harvestworks for hosting, and for Kevin for bringing us into this process. Okay. Well, I'll just start. So I'm Lindsay Campbell. You have a little bit about me there. I work for the Forest Service in New York City, which sometimes gets a lot of physical looks. Just quick background. Thanks. We don't own or manage any land here in the city. We're a research partner, and also you wouldn't want to be stuck in a forest with me or asking about my tree ID skills. I'm a human geographer and a social scientist. So really what we are systems scientists, and we're thinking about the city as a social ecological system, and we partner with lots of different folks, but primarily the New York City Parks Department, where Bram sits, because they're the largest land manager in the city. They manage 30,000 acres of space. But we also work with NGOs, and what we try to occupy is this sort of space between our logos. We always put up this slide that we are large government bureaucracies, but we try and carve out sort of a space for innovation, knowledge co-production, sort of sharing between research and practice, and that's what we've done for the last 10 years. And this dipping a toe into the arts and humanities world is sort of our attempt to broaden that even further. Bram and I are just going to sort of tag team this quick overview of who we are. And I think what it'll do is just amplify some of the themes that Kevin raised of the sort of greater potential that is here for more of this kind of collaborative work with field stations like us.
So I usually start with this slide for many reasons, but I think even more so tonight. I'm trained as a land manager, although I was also trained as an ecologist. And I always knew I am born and raised in New York City, so I always knew I would come back to practice in the city, and so I think about place a lot. And when I think about place, I think about New York City a lot, because this is where I'm from, and this is where I practice. And so both at school and in my profession, I of course think about our environmental history, and this is a rendering of Manhattan in 1609. It comes from a book called Mannahatta by a close colleague of ours, Eric Sanderson. And for land managers and for ecologists, you need reference points in the same way that you need reference points for anything that you are doing or studying. And this is a reference point for us, even though we are not trying to recreate this. But it is important for us to understand what all New York City was, but this is just Manhattan, in part because when you make decisions about certain things, you have to know what was there before. Not only because you want to necessarily reproduce the composition of species that you have there, but more so because of water tables or high bedrock, depending upon what you're doing. But this is place, as I think about it, for what New York City was. And I want you just for a quick moment to see it is not just the trees and wetlands there. You can see the smoke. And those were the native communities that lived there at the time. And if you look to the left, that thing that looks like a little bird that's on the water, anyone want to guess what that is? This is 1609. That would be, and the half moon. And so Eric had to choose, when he was trying to understand the ecological history of this place, he had to choose some point, and he chose 1609. So, next slide. So, as a land manager, not as an ecologist per se, this is the New York City I think about now. And the divisions between the opens, between the built and the green. And so you can see these distinctions, and we have them in acres. And I think it's important to think about when you're here, but amplifying the themes that Kevin and Lindsay were talking about, when you're also thinking about art of place. And this is me moving far afield from what I do. I'm not an artist, although, as Lindsay was describing, we ask artists to come into our space to give us new perspective, and we'll get to that more. But to me, I spend a lot of time thinking about these landscape divisions. So I just wanted to sort of orient everybody with these two slides.
So just a little bit more about our history and context. Kevin already referenced the long-term ecological research station. So we're building on this really kind of long tradition of doing long-term ecological research. So the Forest Service manages these experimental forests and grasslands, where they're doing things like monitoring the atmosphere, monitoring the water quality, soil quality, tree canopy, etc. Sometimes based on a particular research question, but sometimes for the questions that you don't even know to pose because the shifts are so sort of large scale. Things like the Hubbard Brook is a very famous experimental forest, and it led to fundamental breakthroughs in how we understand acid rain. So sometimes you don't even know the question that you can answer, through monitoring. That's the idea of this long-term research. But not only do these happen in these more quote-unquote pristine or wild places, but there are 2 urban LTERs, and one is in Baltimore and one is in Phoenix. And the Forest Service has been co-lead on the Baltimore site since the 90s. And so we were inspired by the work that was done there with NSF funding. We said, well, can we replicate that? Can we create sort of place-based work where we are studying the city as a social ecological system? So one of our phrases is we're place-based, but we're not place-bound. We have a physical building, but we think about the entire 5 boroughs of New York City, even the estuary, the region, and then we're a part of a network of field stations that you see here. So we have colleagues in Philadelphia, Chicago, San Juan, LA, and Denver. And so our agency has really recognized that the city is urbanizing, but we're not just sort of within the green line of the lands that we manage, but we need to understand cities as systems as well. Doing this in partnership with parks, we sort of said, could we have a desk and a phone? And they said, well, I'll do you better, we have a building. And so in this building we have, I think I have on the next, oops, I'll jump ahead. We have an office and a lab with residential space. So we are a true residency where people can stay for free for anywhere from 3 days to 3 months. So we have students, we have grad students, we have professors, we have folks who take sabbaticals, and all of that was primarily social scientists and ecological scientists. And we thought, well, we're missing this whole other realm. We've spent 10 years talking across these divisions of research and practice of social and biophysical, but what about the arts and humanities, particularly inspired by spaces like Governor's Island and the Presidio and sort of other government spaces that have facilities that can then be opened up and used in new ways. So the facility was one sort of catalyst, but the other important catalyst is just bringing together different ways of knowing, which is really what we're talking about.
So, physical space is in Fort Totten in Queens. Does anyone know where that is? Oh, excellent. And it's in Bayside. It's in between the Whitestone Bridge and the Frog's Neck Bridge. So it's that fort, that little peninsula that sticks out. So if you're in a traveling mood, come out to the fort. It is a public space owned, run by the fire department, but managed on a daily basis by the Parks Department. So it's a public space, and it's gorgeous.
Yeah, thank you for adding that.
It's not a bad bike ride. Many people bike out to it, yes, and can be done easier than one would think.
It was a sort of Civil War era fort, turned over now public parks. So there's soccer fields and ball fields, but there's all these other agencies there, and then there's us. So this is our mission. I don't need to read the slide, but again, we're thinking about quality of life, we're thinking about social ecological systems, we're interested in basic science all the way to very applied sort of management decisions. This is our team. We're a mixed crew of social scientists, ecologists, postdocs, lab managers. Do you want to mention quickly the NAC, the sort of third leg of our stool?
Yeah, so as Lindsay said, I work for the Parks Department. I've been working for the Parks Department for 26 years. But 5 years ago, I co-founded a nonprofit called the Natural Areas Conservancy. It was started for the same reason the Central Park Conservancy was started in the 80s. The city didn't have the capacity or the money or the willpower to manage Central Park. Same with the forests and wetlands of New York City, which, by the way, are over 20,000 acres of forests and wetlands in New York City. And so being able to identify that gap in the city's capacity to manage this very important space, I, with my co-founder, started Natural Areas Conservancy, and they are part of this, the three legs of the field station, because we as the Conservancy are devoted to science-based decision-making and land management, which feeds directly into the Parks Department's capacity to manage its 30,000 acres of land, a third of it, over 10,000 acres of it being forested wetlands.
So I already mentioned the space, it's pretty much, we have 10 beds, it's full to capacity in the summer, and one of these ideas is we were thinking about sort of the off-season, it's like if Amtrak can do a residency, we can do a residency, but so far we decided we didn't want to just open our doors and say anyone can apply. We wanted to really bring in folks in a thoughtful way to help us learn from the best way to engage with artists. So our first few cohorts who you see on this flyer have sort of agreed to be guinea pigs with us and learn with us, which has been really a great opportunity. These are some of the domains that we work in when we're doing this sort of adaptive management space, just so people can see that we're not just managing trees, we're thinking about disturbance regimes, we're thinking about civic engagement. Most of my work really focuses on stewardship, so individuals, organizations, and networks that are involved in caring for the urban environment, ecosystem services, wildlife and habitat. This is the sort of ongoing sort of everyday sort of trust building exercise that we do to say, well, what are the applied research questions that land managers have, and what is the scientific expertise that sort of the research community can bring to that? That's the sort of two-way flow we've tried to identify, and in that, where are the gaps? Like, where are the places where we don't have expertise? Where are the places where other modes of inquiry can sort of open up whole new spaces for us? So some of this is about taking the temperature of what we already know or might want to know.
So I added these slides just to quickly highlight that the urban field station is emblematic of a planning and intellectual space that the Parks Department did not have when I first started. The Parks Department mainly was reacting to political opportunities and cultural opportunities in their land management. But as we've evolved, as urban conservation has evolved, as I said specifically with the emergence of the field station, we have this space to do real planning and thinking. And what you get is something like this when we're thinking about salt marsh, which of course has taken real importance in people's minds since Sandy, but we've been thinking about salt marshes for a while, so the long-term viability and function of the salt marsh. So we're just looking at the threats, you can read them, and then looking at the kind of things that we can do. And this kind of land management only happens when you have the space to think about it, when you have the partnerships to bring new perspective beyond your own, and you have both the science and the sort of stewardship and on land now, sort of the artist perspective to understand how to make those things happen on the ground. So this next slide is the same idea, right? Connecting research to practice, but needing this multidisciplinary approach that instead of just seeing a single site and not seeing the entire forest, you'll actually have to start thinking about the needs of each of these different types of spaces. And so we're able to categorize which parts of the forest really need whole-scale restoration, which need sort of maintenance, and which need sort of just long-term conservation. And see, we have prices, and so forth and so on. So it's a really important evolution for us as land managers to have the space to think about it.
So we're definitely doing basic science, writing peer-reviewed papers, we're doing the land management, but we also try and sort of let others in and sort of have a public face. So some of that is bringing in outside folks who have different perspectives to use our facility, from engineers to ethnobotanists to anthropologists. That's part of the great thing of having free housing in New York City. But also we go to public-facing seminars and events, things like this. Things that we co-convene with people. They can be large to small scale, like the convening we had at our space, along with Harvestworks, where we always try and have multiple disciplinary perspectives represented. We don't really tend to give lectures. We always try and have ecology, social science practitioners sort of thinking together about tough and emergent issues like urban wildlife and the return of the coyote, how we think about urban wood as a resource flow that we want to use. So these are some of the diverse partners that we've worked with in doing these kinds of convenings. And finally, we've landed with this Arts and Humanities residency, which we launched in 2016. We had a hand-picked set of artists who were willing to sort of be guinea pigs and learn with us. They range from kind of doing public sculpture to countercartography to photography, but they were all sort of interested in different pieces of the social ecological system. We learned a lot from them, and what we do is we give them access to data if they want it, to field sites, to our own sort of knowledge and networks, points of introduction. They become sort of part of our community of practice, and vice versa. We learn from them. In 2017, we did a sort of like a partially restricted call. We didn't do a fully open call, and these are the folks who we're working with right now. I won't go over the slide, but they all sort of, what I think about their work is it's art as inquiry. It's as another way of knowing, and that we're the same way a researcher has a research question and methodology, artists have methodologies that we can learn from and have exchanges over. And there's actually a lot more common ground than I would have thought. You know, I'm a qualitative scientist, so that's not that different from the sort of walking practice and observational practice that Matt Jensen has. So we are going on this journey together, and we're excited to continue it. I'm really excited to hear from the artists in the room about their work, but I know we've taken too long, but these are some of our ambitions or reflections. We try to be this boundary-spanning or boundary-dissolving institution, checking the bureaucracies at the door. We try to bring new perspectives and insights to both land management and stewardship, and we see art as a new realm for us to collaborate with. It's beyond, you know, our wheelhouse of science and land management. And what we really want to get to is transdisciplinary work, where we're actually posing new questions together. It's one thing for us to provide space for artists or access to resources or field sites, but can we get to a place where we're both sort of starting together and launching projects together? So, and finally, the idea of communication and engagement. And like, how many people are going to be excited to read my research papers? Probably not that many, but we can engage sort of our whole selves, our whole bodies through all these different sort of modalities, and also, you know, the public. So for us, we're really excited about this conversation and this whole program, and look forward to learning from you all. So sorry we took a little long. Yeah, thank you.
Well, Ben and Mimi, you would like to go?
Sure.
Let's quickly find your information here. So Ben and Mimi will present excerpts from Fathom, Hudson River Data as a Music Project. Are you on?
It took it a second before.
I'll take that.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm Ben Neill, this is Mimi Goese. We've been working together for, well, closely for, I guess, about 12 years or so. And we're both Hudson Valley transplants from Lower Manhattan, where we first knew each other back in the 90s. And we did a piece in 2010-11 that was inspired by the Hudson River, more through the idea of the kind of sampling 19th century music and art from the Hudson River School kind of thing. But this was a project that just came up in the last year that is much more specific in terms of this kind of discussion. Jump in anytime you want. So this piece started with a conversation that I had with John Cronin, who was the original Riverkeeper. The Riverkeeper organization started in the Hudson Valley region in the late 70s, and Cronin was the first full-time Riverkeeper who was out on the river in a boat starting in 1983, monitoring what was going on with different environmental issues in the river. But then recently he founded the Beacon Institute for Rivers and Estuaries, which is a research organization that does something similar, I believe, to what you're talking about. You had mentioned the number of stations, right? They have this RELINE network, the River and Estuary Observatory Network, up and down the river where they're collecting all this data. And I had a conversation with John just informally several years ago when he was telling me all about how excited he was and about this project. And I said, well, we should make some music out of it. And a couple years later, then he approached me about really doing it. So one of the issues, of course, when you look at this tremendous amount of data that they were collecting is, well, how are we going to focus it? What are we going to actually choose? Because there's just so much, you have to eliminate it. This was where it got really interesting in our collaboration. Terry Platts was an administrator who we were working with, and she suggested that we focus on the data around Hurricane Sandy, because for them, that is the most dramatic demonstration of the different kinds of changes that are happening in the river. And then we applied for a New Music USA grant, which we got, which enabled us to have the funding for this. So we created this form scheme in which we looked at all the data they had collected 2 weeks before Hurricane Sandy, the week of Hurricane Sandy, and then 2 weeks after. Those were the dates. And then we took an approach to the progression of the work to starting in the southernmost site and then moving up the river and then gradually coming back down. And the score, may be a little hard to see. So basically, these are all, if you look up at the top, is the timeline, and then you see it starts at, it's kind of small, West Point, Newburgh, Dutch Apple, Stillwater, Freeman's Bridge, North Creek, and then comes back down. And so then over on the left side are all of the various things that were being monitored, and then these were all the different graphs of the data for those particular periods, which we worked with. A little hard to see, but you get an idea that we really took we made the structure, really specifically based on and what they collected and where. And obviously they weren't collecting as many things in different locations, so that also created a kind of inherent formal structure. So, and then just talking a little bit about how we translated it. So we would start with a graph of the data, then we would reverse that into a white line on a black background because that was the sonification process that we were using. I used this kind of older software program called Metasynth, which has a function to create audio from images. And then we imported that into Ableton Live, where we could convert those Metasynth files to various kinds of instruments. A lot of scaling is involved, so I'm going to demonstrate that in a second in terms of exactly how we make the data create musical material. And then in Final Cut Pro, we animated the graphs and matched them to the sound material so that hopefully the connection between the data and the music is very perceptible. So this is just one example. This is the very first piece of data that's used in the piece. It's a 40-minute piece. And this was the barometric pressure that was collected in West Point. And you can see there what we found in the data and why the choice of the Hurricane Sandy was a very interesting choice is that in many of these graphs, you see these very dramatic changes that would happen. right around the October 28th, which was when the hurricane happened. So we would take that, then reverse it to this kind of a format, which and then enables the program to read it. And then this one's is a slow-moving one, but in this case it's a microtonal kind of scale where the line is outlining a melody of sorts. So then, what I would do is take that kind of a microtonal line and inside of Ableton Live basically catch certain pitches when it would catch on an equal tempered scale so that I could create musical material based on that. So then I get also a traditional musical notation out of that. Here's one that moves a little quicker where you can see it a little better. So you get the idea. Some of them then are kind of thicker, so those would create more polyphonic textures. Oops. In this case, you're going to hear several different lines going on, but the piano part was generated from this kind of more blocky structure. And in that case, also samples of Mimi's voice are and then I just wanted to show you a little bit of how all of that kind of goes together. So that excerpt, the slow-moving one that I was...
Ben is the mastermind behind the math and the data. And my job is to touch people, to bring the audience in, like you were saying, the public, to reach the public. So I got myself into a battle between New York City and Sandy, and the experience upstate had with Irene, which was also very devastating. So I know we chose Sandy, but I couldn't help but having the Hudson River story on how, since the early 1900s, upstate has been New York City's playground. And I wanted to find a way of bringing a heart element to the work and have it not be about the guilt of, look at how you're destroying the environment, or how we came in and took over from the Indians, and all this sort of aspect of our history. And I concentrated on what I considered a trauma for upstate, which was in I think about 10 different places, but near me, they flooded a huge area that included 10 schools and 10 churches, and 2,000 people had to be relocated, and they had to dig up their relatives, and they had a month, and it was farmers against New York City lawyers. This is in 1906. So I found that to be a place of dynamic between the city and the country, and also how they would take 2 days to come up on steamboats, and the story of the industry and the ice houses and all this sort of stuff is very interesting to me. So I found a way to make it an emotional experience, and how to bring the data around instead of just zeros and ones or molecules of the story, to try to bring it to life and to have it be something that connected people. And then also, I don't know if we're ready to talk about that yet, the video.
Yeah, I was
okay.
One thing I just wanted to say about that too is that as what we tried to do in the piece was, as it progresses, it talks more and more about human intrusion. The first half of it is really primarily instrumental and is focused on just translating the graphs fairly literally, but then about halfway through is when Mimi's part really comes in, and so reflecting the idea of more human intrusion, we start to put more of our own artistic imprint, I guess you could say, on the material, like looping it and treating it more freely, and really shaping it into songs. Yeah, and then the last thing is the crowdsource.
Crowdsource video. So here we are. Here's a great idea. We'll get people to give us information, and they're hanging out on the Hudson River and whatever. And I don't know how much how smoothly it's gone to open yourself up to artists and stuff like that, but it felt so much like, someone would come afterwards and, did you use my, snippet of something 2 seconds long? So it was a little bit like those kids on that you learn from YouTube how to put together whatever, take apart your life or something. It was coming from all angles. It was hard to make it cohesive, but I think in the end, you get a sense that it's put together in a way that is, again, about being on the river and the stories behind why you're on the river and what brings people there. In the end, I think Ben was able to make it make sense and have this song have this sort of color to it, and this one have that one. So.
And then this is just
a lot to take.
This is just a little short, minute long, a few excerpts. And this is from the premiere at the Town Crier in Lincoln. That's a list of all things found at the bottom of the Hudson River. Oh, really? Okay, thank you.
While we're switching, I had one thing, because you guys were talking about the Hudson River so much. So in New York City's ecosystem, this region is unique in the world. There is no ecosystem like it in the world. In fact, there's more biodiversity here, or was, than Yellowstone, just sort of easy comparison, and that is because of two things. One, this is where the Mid-Atlantic region meets the New England region. So at the end of the North Bronx is where New England starts. The northern and south side of Staten Island is where the Mid-Atlantic starts. But it's also where the Hudson River meets the Atlantic Ocean. And because of that, you have estuaries and this marine intertidal life that you won't find anyplace else. So that's speaking to the level of the Hudson River, which I have to. I grew up on the Hudson River, so it is very good.
Yeah. Thanks, Grant. We'll hear from Kristin Lucas. Kristin has a project called Flamingos, and she recently exhibited the piece in San Francisco, or you should
Yeah, so after I got a Harvestworks artist in residence new works grant, or artist in residence, I just all of a sudden I started getting all this support for the project, so I thank you for, it's amazing, and I feel like it all started here, so it's so nice to be here. And I love this idea about the artist in residence and the field station stuff. It's like all awesome, and I did fill out that survey online. Okay, so I'll try to introduce very quickly. This is a piece I started in 2016 in December, so a year ago today. Maybe not quite a year. It's like a week from now. I came up with this idea. And I was interested in flamingos. I spent a lot of time in Florida. I realized flamingos were on everything there. And as a visual artist, I'm very aware of like the different kind of language of images and things like that. So I was fascinated by the fact that there were actually no flamingos in the wild in Florida. They've been extinct for over 100 years, and there's just on occasion been a couple spotted in the Everglades, but they don't come back. They're not breeding here anymore. We hunted them near extinction. We took all their species. So I was fascinated by this undying love of flamingos in our culture, and I've been working in augmented reality for a while, and I connected the two. I was very interested in the both the presence and absence of the flamingo, and this technology which has an intangibility to it, and bringing together that with the uncertainty of future. And so I started reaching out to conservationists and conservation scientists, and I was doing all this reading by biologists on wetland ecologies and specifically flamingos too, and I started to be really surprised when I gave them, I would send them these emails. I thought that they would think I was crazy, and they actually all wanted to work with me. I met all these people. I went and traveled to see flamingos with them all over this last year through residency programs. And then I produced this piece. I got this huge amount of support through an Engadget Alternate Realities grant. And this just premiered 2 weeks ago in Los Angeles. I want to first show you, instead of talking, they did interview me, and they did a really good job of sort of putting together a lot of the ideas. They will do a better job, and you'll probably pay attention because there's lots of things happening. And then I'll show you just a really short clip from the actual experience in that way. So this is and I have no idea what the audio is going to be, so I apologize for this.
I adopted 20 flamingos. I thought, I'm never going to see these flamingos. I thought it was hilarious. It's like, buying a planet or something.
I was like, what's this thing with flamingos? Why do I like flamingos? Unfortunately, I have no personal flamingo stories. This project certainly has given me reason to go and find some, though.
Yes, well, Flamingos is a mixed reality experience in which humans can dance with virtual flamingos. I'm really interested in that you can't grasp them, the intangibility, of the flamingo and the uncertainty of their future. Populations have declined quite a bit, but our own population has, grown so much, and human activity has moved into wetland areas, and now with the threat of climate change and sea level rise, flamingos, as a member of like a wetland ecology, are under more threat than ever before.
When I entered into this project, I would say my relationship with flamingos was, I assume, similar to the majority of people, and that was that I had seen a lot of plastic flamingos on wire legs stuck in yards, and seen them adorning various arbitrary surfaces and objects.
The flamingo is a bit of a cultural icon for us, and there's sort of a flatness to an icon. And a lot of representations of flamingos are consumable, like they are about the pink color, there's not a lot of information. So I'm interested in the human relationship to the flamingo, like humans love flamingos. So this is a really good entry point to have a deeper discussion. These are neurons that snap in.
My first interaction with it was, oh, that's funny, flamingos. And then the more I talked to her, the more I saw that there's a pretty deep philosophical concept underneath it.
So you guys back, can you put your head down?
Yeah. My project is it's very connected to the fantasy of the flamingo and also the factual of the flamingo. So I try to balance those two.
Kristin's been great to work with. She's incredibly enthusiastic and is really pushing us to explore with her rather than acting sort of like a creative director and dictating the way things need to go.
So one thing we can do is we can also create another animation that really just hits your pose where you're stretching.
Yeah, just a short one.
Just a short one. Let me show you how to do that.
So I want to create the experience of a flock of 20 flamingos moving through, doing this march, doing the mating dance, and that you get to be right in there with them. It's a flamingo-led dance, and you can join it. I will do a salute where I throw my wings back as far as I can, and my neck is up tall, and then I'm going to start marching around. I'm using motion capture as a recording technology. I'm thinking about the choreography. And I'm saying, what makes a flamingo a flamingo? What do I carry away from that experience? And one is the synchronicity of flamingos. Head flagging. A flamingo will be standing or in motion. They'll be turning their head in rapid succession to the left or to the right. Wing salute. A flamingo will suddenly throw back their arms as wide as they can, about 40 degrees behind their back, for 1 to 2 seconds and pull them back. And they might be head flagging, they might be preening as they're marching. I don't have a really long neck. That's like one of the hardest parts to figure out with motion capture because they do so much with their necks.
The first time I actually put the HoloLens on and had my own flamingo head and then was able to look across the room and see another person with a flamingo head, it was amazing because despite knowing exactly how it worked, there was just this sort of moment where we just both switched into like playfulness.
I wanted the flamingo to be very accessible and more like a sketch. I wanted it to sort of carry some of the simplicity of the types of images that I see in fashion and tourism. So to be easily recognizable as a flamingo, you might also actually feel bad for it. One of the things is it has a hole in its chest, and that came out of just like me doing it wrong. And then we just kept it, because it was just like, why does that flamingo have a hole? We never get there. Nobody ever asked me that, but it's really clear that there's something going on. You can see right through the flamingo. To me, that expresses something about the vulnerability.
Somehow, it puts a smile on your face. So when people wear HoloLens, and there's 3 of them in the room, and they're seeing big flamingo heads instead of each other's head, that it just creates a kinship, and something happens. That has got nothing to do with technology or with AR. It's a human thing.
Despite the fact that you're in the room with other people and it's augmented reality, you know they're standing there looking at you, you feel totally free to just sort of like become your goofy self and dance with these virtual birds in the room. There's this amazing sort of transformative experience knowing that other people are seeing you in this augmented way.
You're handed a tablet. We're working with iPad Pros and AR Kit, and you're able to move around in space and populate your surroundings with flamingos. And you can interact with those flamingos to view information graphics.
in this project, we're trying to get our audience to feel as they're part of the flock of flamingos. So it's about people adapting to the flamingos, not flamingos or nature adapting to them.
And so it seemed like a great opportunity to do something really interesting and take on a pretty significant problem, which is trying to get these devices to all agree on the cohesiveness of the world space.
I wanted the devices to be able to be in a shared unified reality, and so that's what I tasked Ben and Thomas to think about.
Further over this way so that the avatar is on the frame. So you're just outside there you go. There's really no built-in mechanism to get these devices, even multiple iOS devices, to have a cohesive understanding of where the 000 point of the world is.
Instead of we all just have our own augmented realities on our phones or on our headsets, we're all looking at a shared augmented reality, and that's where you can start doing interesting interactive things.
That was sort of the crux of the problem, since we want to have HoloLens and also iOS devices both seeing the same augmented objects in space and having that lock up with the physical space as well. We're relying on some physical artifacts in the space to act sort of like anchor points that we can use to kind of rally all of the different devices around so that they understand the space in the same way. I feel like we're definitely at this kind of like inflection point where AR and VR have this opportunity to become ubiquitous the way that smartphones did. I think there is huge possibility with AR and VR to change how people interact. We're seeing now kind of the fallout of everyone having screens with them all the time. People get lost in screens rather than being in the world around them. And I feel like we can sort of take the connectedness and the power that these devices have given us, and we can take the eyes off the screen and kind of reconnect with the world and the people around us in some new and interesting ways.
That's why I'm interested in AR, because I want you to be able to interact with more than one world at the same time. I like the porousness between worlds. I like the porousness between devices. You know, there are many different paths to take here to have this conversation about flamingos. And I don't want them to be held separate from one another. I want to understand the whole ecology of thoughts, of conflicts, of concepts that are a part of this piece.
Scientists, specifically the data that I had from the 20 flamingos that I adopted. I had like their migration path. Every time that a flamingo is recited, it can be that information can be sent to the organization that I adopted the flamingos from, and then they enter it into their database. So I have a 39-year-old flamingo that I've adopted, or that was ranked 39 years ago, and that flamingo has been cited 337 times. And so I have both that kind of information. I also have like breeding information, a lot of different information. And I've used it on another project for some sound work. This one I'm using it with infographics, so you can like that each of the flamingos has a leg band, so you can tap on the iPad and pull that information graphic up. And I also run an adoption campaign through the project, so you can also leave having adopted a flamingo. And all of the flamingo adoptions go toward purchasing telescopes for partner organizations in the Mediterranean, and so that they can continue and learn more about areas that are they just don't have documentation for. So I'll just quickly give you this little bit of a peek of what actually happened. So the HoloLens had to be in this contained area because it loses its spatial tracking easily. demonstrate, this is how the calibration happened for both the iPads and the HoloLens. They had, it was sort of like and it's got scent, fragrance, then it's interactive stage, and then it's immersive. And you will hear a full song that travels with the flamingos. On how all 6 flamingo species are on the red list for threatened species and what the main causes are and things like that. So I'm trying to like combine all this stuff together, give real information at the same time as allow you to kind of engage from an ethical distance with the flamingo and fulfill your fancy. And that's it.
Our final presenter is Campbell and he is going to talk about CityGram. CityGram was a piece that we presented at the 2015 New York Electronic Art Festival on Governor's Island. Tay is a researcher at New York University in the sound research lab. And what it is he places sensors around the city to measure the noise level, and then that data is sent to be sonified into music and various sound art pieces.
Well, thank you, and thanks for staying this long Friday night. Pretty awesome. As Carol mentioned, I'm a professor over at the Younger, just close by, at NYU, and teaching the music technology program and also the composition program. And today I'm going to give you a brief overview of a project that's called CityGram. And this sort of effort or campaign of sound mapping our world and trying to preserve some of the sonic elements that we hold quite dear in our hearts, but is again slowly working rapidly. The sub-theme is sound mapping our world in 3D is basically playing with this idea that we are coaching this through a data-driven, community-driven, architect-driven strategy. So why sound maps? The motivation basically comes from observing traditional maps. Traditional maps, as you probably know, who's used wind maps recently? Not really. That was actually a joke, but lots of folks use Google Maps, or back in the day, we used these map lists to go from A to B. Remember those? We pin the map and we drive it. We hopefully don't go get into an accident, but they're two-dimensional. And they represent fixed, static, slowly changing elements, like buildings, rivers, forests, and streets, and highways, and so on and so forth. So the sampling rate, or the number of times we have to take pictures per second, is not at the second scale. That's why I think these maps have worked really well, and I use Google Maps all the time, because it's very easy to use, it's very useful. But it's also very ocular, pertinent to things that you can see. So my question, since I was a little boy, that's actually true. So one of the questions I had in 3 was this idea of, would it be possible to go to a place, create a place, and bring back memories from the past? And I was like, is that actually possible? And so I did a soundscape study, ecology study. I went to my birthplace, which is in Austria, Vienna. That's where I was born. I may not look like an Austrian, but trust me, I did eat a lot of Wiener Schnitzel. And I remembered these sounds from when I was a child, and I went back in 2003 and tried to capture those sounds. And it was indeed possible, and some of the sounds actually remained the same. Very iconic. So there's the sounds of New York, sounds of Kinshasa. I lived there for 2 years actually. Sounds of Seoul, Kuala Lumpur, and all these places. And I thought, oh, that's pretty amazing. How could we actually create these sound maps, which do not exist? The traditional model is putting little pins on maps and then pressing the play button. And it's a very static, sort of frozen in time experience. So we thought, well, that's not going to solve this problem of value here, value don't, right? So we come back into this group, or somebody interested in doing it 2 weeks later, and they're like, what cloud? So the paradigm shift has happened. So the sound too good. How many times you have to update these maps becomes a problem. And this idea of spatial temporal granularity, I mean, you can't just have one sensor in a city to capture the entire soundscape, which is basically been the traditional way of doing things. Like 5 sensors in New York City, 3 sensors in Chicago, and so on and so forth. That doesn't cut it. And so that's where I come in. We try to sort of approach the idea of sound mapping the world, which is basically divided into these 4 different areas. One is big data, the other one is community. So there's actually a community engagement project, and art. This idea of art being very important. I think all of you guys have talked about this, which is amazing. And this idea of soundscapes being very important because you can't really see it. So imagine had we had something like this, or somebody had built this system where we would be able to hear the sounds from 1,233 years ago. Or actually a bit further back, from 20,000 years ago. Now think about how would it be possible to actually hear the sounds from 10,000 years from today? I think the answer is obviously yes. So I want to sort of make that possible from an interactive perspective using AR, VR. I don't want to do that, but that's just a way of interfacing with data and whatnot. And a very big problem that contextualizes this research is one is very practical. That's the greater noise pollution problem. And as you probably know, in New York City, as quantified through 3119 New York City Hotline, the #1 complaint is noise. So it's very loud, and that's probably why we call it the city that never sleeps. Number 2 is landlords. I can see why. So that's our quantification of what's actually happening. That's very similar in London and Seoul. And actually, the #1 reason that neighbors either get into a fight, and actually the #1 reason they kill each other is because of those demons. It's kind of sad, and we're sort of trying to make that a bit better so that neighbors get along with each other. So how is this being done? So the first thing is, if there's a problem, we sort of approach it with this about we can't fix it, we can't measure it. So we need sensors in the space. Big problems, gotta solve that. And then bigger is better, or bigger data is better, more data is better, more coverage in New York City is better than just one mic. You want to have 2 mics now, many more mics. That's a big problem. Seeing and hearing is believing, right? When you see things, you start believing, so you want to map it somehow in real time. That's also a big problem. Then the last one is where the artist comes into play. Music is the universal language of mankind, as we've heard this evening, and as we've seen also this evening. So we try to sort of approach urban noise pollution and sound mapping through these 4 very basic adagio. So first thing, measuring and sensing. So we developed this system called plug and sense sensing network. What that basically means is we want to enable everyone to be able to participate. This idea of zero cost sensors. So again, the old paradigm in the past, which was very recent, was this idea of selling these sensors that cost like $10,000. That's literally how it is right now with around LGA, JFK, we have a total of 30 sensors that measure noise pollution. Those things cost like $20,000 million. So you can see why that's a problem, but it doesn't have to be that expensive, as you know. And so we want to have everybody be able to participate, send the data to the cloud, visualize it, have access to it, learn about it, educate people, and share. And then this sort of thing rotates very quickly, and if it rotates quickly, definitely you can hear it, I suppose. And a big problem in this idea of creating sensors or having sensors in the space is the problem of cost and how to build these remote sensors. So back in the day, we used these mini computers, which were not many, expensive, but we used them to get proof of concept, work nicely, meaning you can record, do some analysis, and the data can share it on your handheld devices or your desktop or whatnot. Then we went to Raspberry Pis when they first came out. They were not powerful enough to handle this, so we should put that aside. Then there were these mini PCs. Basically, these are televisions, kind of. So you just stream your YouTube videos onto your TV with an HDMI port. And I was like, that's perfect, because I was looking for a device like an iPhone without all the eyes, without the phones, just the butts. That's what that was. That costs probably down like $20. It's a quad-core computer with HDMI, USB, Bluetooth. Basically, it's a very powerful machine. So we use that. Cost comes down tremendously. Then we use these very tiny mics that we call Boost mics. They cost like 50 cents each. These are the mics that are actually installed here. They have very good sound quality. They're not crap mics, as we technically say. They're very good mics. Not as good as calibration mics, but very, very sophisticated. But then, Raspberry Pi made a comeback with Raspberry Pi 2, now we have Raspberry Pi 3. Everything is built into a $35 mini computer that's so powerful that you don't need any of those other things that we investigated. So we're at this point where we want to make possible that every device can be transformed into a sound monitoring device. That's where we are right now, and we basically ported all of our stuff to this language called JavaScript, which probably many of you know. And JavaScript is great because it runs on the thing that you use every day, the web browser. Right? So that allows it to run on any machine, and also including your smartphones and not the iPhone because they block the audio. And also Node.js, which allows it to run outside of the web browser. So this idea of zero-cost sensor network now becomes reality. You participate in Citigram just putting an A URL. If you have a mic like this one, you become what we call a streamer. It's a great title for a movie, I think, but I digress. So sound labs, plug and sense, like literally plug in the computer, you start sensing the Christmas lights, you turn on, and this idea of zero-cost sensors, because if you want to get the community involved, you want to make it zero-cost. Right? Otherwise, it makes no sense. So being a researcher, I see this all the time, and I'm one of those guys, but the idea is that not I can do this, the idea is that we can do this together. There's no way that researchers can do this alone. And so that's the impetus behind this plug and sense and network idea. So anyone with a web browser might internet can participate. Then we also are building these more custom sensors. Like this is called the Windows sensor. Does anyone use Windows operating systems? Has nothing to do with that. I'm just curious. So this was invented just because I was thinking, what do all buildings have? They have walls, they have roofs, and they also have windows. Not the operating system, but windows. And I was like, well, if we could turn the windows into sensors, that would be pretty awesome. So that's what this is. But you can't use the window itself because they have different specifications. There's sometimes like double pane and whatnot, which is good because it kills the noise. This one actually basically is a sensor that goes outside the window, so you just use Velcro, stick it to the outside of the window. Use this guy, which is a wireless charger, a wireless power supplier, and it's a wireless sensor that you just stick it onto your window, and voila, you have a sensor that works without any wires. Everything else is Bluetooth based and Wi-Fi and plug-in sense. So that's more of a custom thing. And then the important thing is, as I mentioned before, seeing is believing. Right? So we get all the data, all the analysis data from the sensors, send it to the cloud, and it's shared with everyone who wants to browse the data on your computer, your smartphone, your tablet. That's not tablets. Between tablets and phones. All those crazy things. And I could probably show you this, but we're sort of making final tweaks so that early next year we'll have access to it and sort of see the noise pollution around New York City and anywhere that has nodes or sensors with a microphone, internet, and web browser. So participation, becoming a streamer, is really simple, plug and sense, quite literally. Exploration, so the Serial data is open data that allows you to stream data from your web browser to your, whatever, let's say your toaster, not sure why, but to your DAW or to your visualization in Unity or whatnot. And this basically uses this language called, or protocol called OSC, Open Sound Control, which literally can be used to turn on your toaster in the morning, if you want. And another big part of community engagement is learning and education outreach, and I've collaborated with Harvestworks and Campbell a number of times. I've done some hackathons at Spotify. We've worked with NYS DEC, Department of Environmental Protection. We did one last September. NYS Stage Festival was last year with the Global Arts, and Carol also was part of our collaborators. Just this past October, we went to Seoul, and they had this hackathon called Utopia, and we won the Party Animal Prize. Not sure why, but we just worked all day long, so in Korea, when you work all day, you're a party animal. And then next year, I'm organizing the ICMC, which stands for International Community Music Conference. So this will become part of that. So we want to have people participate, and this is a campaign to map the noise pollution of our urban environments, like New York, like Seoul, like Tokyo, Paris, and all these places that have these pollutants omnipresent throughout the day, and throughout the week, and month, and year. So that's what that is. And then you also wear the hat of the artist. I'm also a composer, apparently. So music is great because you can use it as a vehicle to do outreach, and make it fun, and then sort of use the Jedi mind trick to think that they're actually looking at art and having fun, and then you sort of underneath explain what's happening, very sort of aware of the seriousness of our environment, especially in big cities. So some of these examples, this was done at this conference called Seamus, which is a society for inclusive music in the United States. This was in Virginia Tech, 2015. I think this works. The rainbow is okay, it's rainbow. In any case, so it wasn't your computer, was my computer. It's a big file. But basically, the idea was we had sensors in New York City. in Plattsburgh, Virginia, and then one was in Paris. So I did a residency at Georgetown in Paris for like 3 months somewhere. So we had sensors there, and the sounds were being streamed from there, and we used those to create the interpretation of noise through these 3 anchors. And we sort of walk around the space and be immersed in this synthetic soundscape, sort of listen to sirens and things like that. This one was a government assignment, again, in collaboration with Karen. She's awesome, as you know. And this was there for the duration of the summer. This was one of our earlier ones. This one was at the storefront gallery. And we used these iPads to show different elements of noise, like how bright the sound is, how quickly changing is the noise, how much energy is there in terms of noise. So there's many dimensions in noise. It's not just a dB noise. So a great way to understand this is, you guys know about blackboards? Has anyone used blackboards? Also, old school people. So, yeah. Not the digital ones. So back in the day, when I was using blackboards, my teacher told me that you do this on a blackboard. So now I can sort of imagine the same levels of blackboard sound is different when you play a sound like the ocean at that dB level. Right? So not every sound is equal, even if they have the same levels. It's a multi-dimensional configuration that you have with sounds. So we try to sort of analyze that on the device, but only send actually the analyzed data to the cloud, so that we actually also protect privacy. This one was done just this past October, so we spent 4 days hacking. And the visual artist, one of our collaborators, Tony Lim, did the interpretation of the video part, where this wall of Unity implementation basically reacts to the soundscape data around Seoul. And then we basically had around 13 little Raspberry Pis with their own speakers, individual agents, on the ceilings that would create sound. So you will not see it. So one very important thing that I sort of support as an artist is that the transparency of the machine. I don't like to actually see the machine. I want it to be invisible. I want you to experience the music, video, and stuff without seeing all the guts. If you're interested in the guts, that's great, but I think that's a different sort of, and one is technical, one is musical. And this one was last year at Carnegie Hall, Zachary Hall, and this was again this idea of having the noise data from around the world be streamed to Carnegie Hall, have it be have it drive parts of the music, parts of the video, and also performance. So this idea is sort of the planet Earth being an interface, and jamming the planet Earth in a sort of way. So I played bass on this one, and the reason I actually played bass is because I'm a bassist, and I'm also the composer, so the composer can determine who plays. And I was like, yeah, Carnegie Hall, nice place to play. Okay, so I put in the bass part. That was really awesome. The bass, string quartet, piano, drum kit, microphone, and audio visuals. And that's basically it. As I mentioned, next year we'll have the ICMC in Korea, first time. And since 44 years ago, and we'll be running the programs of the theme of the conference, with preservation, engagement, and advancement, as a sort of metaphor to look at the environment. That's it.
I think we'll do questions from the audience. I think if you have any. I thought it was pretty awesome. We covered really a lot of areas.
Thank you so much for all your talking. I had a question for you. How many people do you think should be like assessors or like part of this project?
How many there's 3 buttons. One is the rewind button. It goes to the birth rate of every sensor. One is just this play button. If you press the play button, you actually see all the sensors that are currently running and access it. Like around 90 to 100.
That's like people that are not involved in a project that are like,
Right.
oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And is that on the CityGram website?
That is in the CityGram website. So I'll share that once it's more stable.
Do you know do you know any like information about these people? Like, are they researchers? Are they just general public? Like, are people interested in this? Like,
That's a very good question too. I have no information. Who they are, what they do. They could be aliens. I do not know. And privacy is very important, so we don't take any information whatsoever.
thank you.
Thank you very much for the talks. It's really inspiring. In my artistic practice, one of the things that really gets me going is this deep synergy between art and science. And I think there's a lot of ways that can be expressed in terms of taking science and communicating that to the public. And one of the things that really makes me excited is when the art then feeds back into the science and starts driving the science in new ways. And I think that can happen in different ways, generating new ideas. And one way that it's happened in some of my work, my background is in neuroscience, and some of my work involves neuroscience and psychology concepts. And there's a feedback that comes in when people engage with the work. So you can capture data about people, either their brain waves or their reaction times or whatever. And I've also done some ecology work, and I'm trying to figure out good ways to complete that circle in ecology, where the art is really then gathering data or somehow really completing that circle. So I'm interested in this panel, what you guys think about that, the possibilities, for really creating these deep synergy and loops in science.
But does that mean you want the art to have an impact on those who are interested in ecology?
Yeah, to change the science, for the art to change the science. I mean, I think it's also great to change the public opinion and start conversations, which ultimately changes the ecology science as well. And I'm just interested in kind of blooming that in a deep way.
I was working with these researchers in France, and there is an artist who was a photographer who was doing a lot of photographing of birds, like migrating. And he developed a software that would help to count large numbers that scientists are using now as an example of.
I mean, mine are a little more like sort of orthogonal to that, like examples, but I mean, when you say just posing new questions, I mean, to me, that's the start of the research cycle. So even being able to know the different questions that you might ask, or to ask these sort of brash or brazen questions that we wouldn't ask from our situated place, that's been a lot of our work with Mary Mattingly, because my own research has been on community gardens and urban agriculture and sort of policy and governance systems that lead to the way the land is managed. And she could just ask this brazen question like, well, why can't it be different? And why can't we make this provocation on a place like a floating food forest where the rules are different? But so she can do that as an artist, but to do it then in partnership with the land manager that actually sets the rules, it kind of created an opening. So I don't think just posing the question is kind of part of that feedback loop. That's one thing that I can think of. And then, oh shoot, in giving that example, I lost my other one. I'll come back to it. You just gave an example of
Photographer and then software to count large numbers of birds.
Yeah, no, it wasn't that. I wrote down the word convening, but it'll come back to me. But I think that's been really, really powerful, is to get sort of people on the front end posing different questions than we would otherwise. It was responding to your work. So thinking about landscapes as sort of multi-sensory, experiential, and really tied to memory, the kinds of methods that I would use as a social scientist would be like surveys, interviews, participant observation, like very grounded either in the place or kind of mediated through a conversation. And some of my work, I've looked at Fresh Hills, landfill, and when it used to be, as a former landfill, sort of transitioning to a park, and I've done focus groups, and I've done surveys, and I've asked people about their memories of this place, and they talk a lot about these multisensory memories, seeing it, smelling it, in some cases the sounds, but like I don't capture any of that texture with the data that I capture. So I can imagine, like, if I had a different set of tools for capturing soundscapes, you know, or smellscapes, then I would tell a different story that's not just verbal, you know, or I would capture different like domains or registers just by having different technologies or modalities or kind of ways to gather data. So I think all that goes to what I was talking about around method, like what counts as data. And I think artists have this really broad understanding of what constitutes data, and it opens up, again, possibilities that get beyond the methods that I know.
Piggyback on that a little bit, I think as artists, we are very fortunate in a way because we can do things wrong. It won't really matter. It does, but not really. So, and I know this, and when I create artwork, I have that in the back of my mind. But one thing that I failed to mention earlier is the project like this one really is a beginning to towards this idea of, and you guys all mentioned this idea of place, right? And this is actually what was the underlying concept of turning space into a place. Mm-hmm. Space is very sort of, you can measure it very clearly, but places become this place that you have attachment to emotion, culture, memory, and that can be made possible by actually smell sensors, sound sensors, humidity, temperature, and all these things. So city plan is actually its first iteration. The second iteration will include smell. So that was actually a joke. So we want to have the maps become virtual augmented reality places. And if I'm not going to do it, somebody else is going to do it, so that you can sort of capture this idea of a place, keep that as a sort of cultural heritage of our Earth. So that's where the science and I think art sort of blur, because there is, I think, no answer there is. That's it.
And how would you capture the smell?
So smell sensing is not so crazily difficult. It's just
you need like something like a microphone, but except for smell.
I have no smell sensors, and I'm not an expert in smell sensing.
What if you have people smell it? How can it download an app?
It would be sampled, right? Just like my phone, you sample it. You would.
It's basically
encode and decode. Everything is.
And the difficulty is every smell is unique, and it's sort of audio spectrum we have. The frequency components, and for smell, there are so many of those in certain patterns which make it difficult to practically capture that through machines, but they do exist. So like gas sensors.
Just stimulate certain neurosensors.
Right now, scent, fragrance design and like capturing is very, very expensive. I tried to bring a soil sample collected from the Bronx Zoo flamingo habitat to a company to do this, and they told me it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so the researcher explained, like, you know, in great detail a lot of the process and things like that, and then he said, what I would do if I were you would be to create an emulsion that carries the scent. So it's more like a lotion that someone can experience, which is, you know, it's like you can do it in your kitchen and, you know, get the ingredients for it. But there are all these scent libraries. And so for my scent that I presented as a wetland scent, it's comprised of samples from a pretty good scent library, and then I found the fifth one that I found and added to it was from the haunted house industry. Sulfur, it makes you smell like a stinky swamp, and they didn't recommend that you put it on your skin even though it was called cologne. But yeah, it's coming, but it's right now like pretty high price points.
I just think one other thing, and it's not something I'm really involved in with, I know there are a lot of artists that have done projects that involve environmental remediation. Mel Chen's Revival Field, I believe, is one like that, and there's an organization called Eco Art Space that works a lot with artists that are more doing projects that have more direct remediation types of goals in terms of feeding back in.
Well, I think it was really great to see the wide range of works that were presented tonight, and I especially wanted our team from the Urban Field Station to become familiar with your work and sort of to inspire them to develop other areas of the residency, and we hopefully will become more involved with the partnership. And maybe we can have a call for projects one time. But that was so very inspired.
Thank you.
So I think are there any more questions? Otherwise, we'll start our weekend. Oh,
yeah, I have more. This for made your work available on any platform. Because I honestly like the atmospheric music that you guys showed us.
Not this material we have, but we do have some other another recording that we put out 5 years ago. But we are planning to release this stuff in the coming months.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, cool. Yeah. I would listen to it.
Great. That's good. That's the idea.
You should get on if you're not on the Harvestworks newsletter. We'll probably
I'll do that.
encourage you guys to come and record and